needed more care before I would consider him safe to go home.
Doctors who examined a 6-year-old boy before his untimely death testified in the murder case against the child's father, Christopher Gregor. Prosecution says Gregor's constant abuse killed his son. The defense says it's not that cut and dry. We are breaking down the latest evidence with legendary defense attorney Ben Chu. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey there, everybody. This is a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge. Well, Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is actually helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their incognito browser. So if you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions at incognitoclaims.com/sidebar. Little 6-year-old Corey Michello died in April of 2021 in Ocean County, New Jersey. His dad, Christopher Gregor, took him to the ER after Corey woke up from a nap disoriented, slurring his words, having trouble breathing. Doctors at the hospital decided Corey needed a CT scan, but during the diagnostic test, Corey started to have seizures, eventually went into cardiac arrest, and he died at the hospital. Medical examiner performed an autopsy on Corey's body, finding his cause of death was blunt force injuries with cardiac and liver contusions with acute inflammation and sepsis. That doctor did not rule on manner of death, instead listing it as undetermined, but a forensic pathologist followed up on the case in September of 2021, changing the manner of death to homicide. That pathologist believes that Corey suffered an acute traumatic injury to his heart between 4 and 12 hours before he died. The doctor said he found evidence of recurring physical abuse. But now Christopher Gregor has been arrested, charged, and he's on trial. And during opening statements last week, the prosecution said that Corey's death was the result of child abuse, and Mr. Gregor is the one to blame. The defense says Corey likely died of sepsis, that the body had a reaction, a response to this massive infection, and that is what caused the death.
Corey Travis Michello. He liked the solar system. He liked to play outside. His mom describes him as silly and happy. Corey was 6 on April 2nd, 2021, when his father murdered him. His father is this defendant, Christopher Gregor. This case is about Corey and how Corey became the ultimate victim of this defendant's punishment and abuse.
And they start to do some testing. And then they decide they need to do a CAT scan. And while during the CAT scan, Corey seizes, goes into cardiac arrest. Life-saving techniques are now used to try to revive him. And he dies. And it sucks, because he's a kid. No child should die. No child should die. But it's not murder.
Now, I want to give you a little bit more background here. So in 2017, Corey's mother, Brianna Michello, filed a petition with the court seeking child support from Mr. Gregor, who says he didn't even know he had a child until then. At this point, Corey was around 4. Gregor said that he wanted to be in Corey's life, so the two worked out a joint custody agreement. In another recent episode of Sidebar, we talked more about Corey's mom, Brianna Michello, in more detail, her drug addiction, this custody arrangement, how she found out her son was dead. You can check that out for more analysis on her testimony. But one of the most standout pieces of physical evidence so far in this case, unfortunately, is surveillance video from inside a small gym at Gregor's apartment complex. We go back to March 20th, 2021. Gregor allegedly forces Corey to run on the treadmill. In the video, you can see Corey falling multiple times, getting back up. Gregor sometimes pulling him up by his shirt, even appears to bite him at one point. Gregor was charged with child endangerment for that in July of 2021. Defense acknowledged that that video looks really, really bad, but it doesn't prove the allegation of child abuse, and it doesn't prove that Gregor caused the death of his son. But remember, Corey died around 2 weeks after this Treadmill incident on April 2nd, 2021. Gregor was charged with first-degree murder in connection with Corey's death almost 1 year later. Court records show Gregor turned down a 30-year plea offer and now faces life in prison if he's convicted. I want to bring in legendary lawyer Ben Shue, friend of the program, friend of mine, famously represented actor Johnny Depp in his infamous trial against Amber Heard. So good to see you, Ben. Really difficult case. What's just your initial impressions? I kind of laid it out, but what's your initial impressions of this case?
Jesse, great to see you as well. Any child abuse case, particularly one which results in death, is tragic. The facts of this seem particularly tragic and awful in light of the abuse that we all unfortunately had to witness on the treadmill.
Yep, that treadmill video will be stuck in a lot of people's heads for a while, including the jury. So here's what I want to do with you. I want to actually play some clips, and I want your reaction to them. So let's actually start with testimony from last week on Friday, because the prosecution called 2 medical professionals, and they were asked about the period of time between the treadmill incident and Corey's death. So Corey's mother, Brianna Michelot, as well as Corey's first-grade teacher, they had noticed this new and worsening bruising on Corey. Michelot took Corey to the pediatrician, who wanted Michelot to take him to the pediatric ER. Let's play this.
And did you make any initial observations when you walked in of how Corey looked?
Yeah, so as a pediatrician, we rely not just on what patients say, but how they're acting, because they don't, kids don't just tell you something hurts. A lot of times they don't, or they don't. So you're always looking from the very start. How are they sitting? How are they looking? Do they look alert? Are they looking bright? Before we set an eye, before we touch a patient, we're looking for all the evidence, everything we can get. And he was sitting quietly. He was breathing easily. He didn't look in any distress. And he just looked very serious, and I'd say, kind of contained, like stoic, kind of. I do give children a chance to say what hurts or what's the problem or what happened, if it's an injury, how did you get hurt. So I did that, and he at first didn't want to say anything. Shake his head. I don't know. And so I explained to him that in order to help him, I had to know how he got hurt and what happened. And still he hesitated, so I said, Corey, we can't help you if we don't know what happened, and please, and don't worry, because I need to know so I can help you be safe. He did. He said that he got the chest and arm and hip bruises and the forehead scrape when he was playing football outside on the turf. And he said that his dad was teaching him how to catch a football. And when I pressed him further, that's a lot from playing football. He said he got more bruises when he fell from a treadmill.
And what was his demeanor while you were speaking with him and he was speaking with you?
Well, as he was explaining this, his mother teared up and started to cry, and then he got tearful as well.
Ben, that is That's really difficult to listen to. That was Dr. Nancy Deacon. This is his pediatrician. And I have to give her so much credit for trying to get those informations out of a young boy, getting those details out of a young boy, because you almost get the sense from her testimony that he didn't want to give the full story about what was happening, but he did give an explanation for what happened. What's your take of it?
I completely agree with you. I think she did a masterful job. Obviously, Corey did not want to disclose the cause of his injuries, and I think this testimony will be inflaming to the jury. Inflaming, I don't mean in an unfair way, but I think it will have an enormous impact on the jury and their sense of the defendant's culpability here.
And by the way, Ben, it's different when you have a victim who's a child than a victim who's an adult, right? Because there's that level of care. There's that level of defenselessness. You can't raise arguments like self-defense or the victim started it or things like that. It's different, right?
Absolutely, Jesse. And I think to the extent that there are parents on the jury, not that you have to be a parent to empathize with Corey, but to the extent that there are parents, I think it will be very hard for them to contain their outrage about this.
So the prosecution had Dr. Deacon explain some of the notes that she'd taken, like a body chart where she labeled multiple areas where Corey had these scrapes or bruises.
Did you make recommendations for Corey before he left your office?
Yeah, so I told Mom that we needed to bring him right. He needed to go right to the hospital. That we had to be sure that he wasn't at risk for even worse bleeding, and his blood work. And honestly, from what I learned and what he said and my whole impression of this visit, that he needed further, even if the DCP&P hadn't been involved, I would have called them. But I thought I'll send him to the hospital for a further evaluation, because he needed more careful evaluation and expert interviewing. That's not my role as a general pediatrician. He needed more care before I would consider him safe to go home.
So Ben, what do you make of that?
Again, I think her testimony is very affecting. She seems to show incredible perseverance and care for this little boy. And it just highlights the absence of care, especially from Christopher. But there was also some issues with the mother too, obviously, which I'm sure you'll get to.
Well, there is an issue, the defense kind of putting some of the focus on her. And talking about the defense, so Gregor's defense team had a chance to cross-examine Dr. Deacon. Let's see how that went.
You show me in your chart where you talk about what Corey told you, that you needed to encourage him to say that he was reluctant to say that to you, that you needed to prompt him, that you needed to show him he was safe. Can you show me anywhere in that chart when you wrote it, that you wrote those things, that, by the way, I would believe are important in an evaluation by a doctor who's asking about child abuse? Where is it in that chart, in that assessment?
So I did not document exactly what I said to Corey.
And as a matter of fact, 10 minutes before this jury walked into this room, did you testify at a hearing in this courtroom?
Yes.
Okay? And when you testified at the hearing in this courtroom, Ms. Schroen asked you a number of questions about that report. Did she not?
She did.
And did you at any time during that questioning before the jury was in this room, say anything about that you had to prompt Corey, you had to encourage him, he was reluctant to answer the questions. Did you say that one time?
I thought I said that he was reluctant. When I asked him, he hesitated. I believe that's what I said. He hesitated. I didn't say in the record that he hesitated. I said just what he said.
Things obviously got a little heated there. The court went back, looked at the transcripts of the pretrial hearing, and it seems that Dr. Deacon did talk about having to prod Corey a little bit to get him to talk. Ben, what's your take on that cross?
I thought the cross was horrible. I'm reluctant to criticize other attorneys because I know how hard it is, as you do. But beating up a likable, credible witness on what's, I think, would strike the jury as a minor inconsistency or a minor omission is only going to make the jury dislike his client even more. That's just my take.
But I guess the angle he was saying was you're making up things, you're saying things now to make Christopher Gregor look more guilty when you didn't document it at the time. So in other words, was she not being credible? Was she not being honest? That's kind of what they were saying, right? What he was trying to point out.
Yeah, I think that's what they were driving at. And I'm not saying it's an illegitimate goal. I just think he raised his voice to her.
Yeah.
I don't think that she has given him any cause to do that. And I think it comes across, you have to be, as you know, Jesse, you have to be very aware of the dynamics, and to have a large man with a loud voice to a generally credible witness, I just don't think it comes across well.
I agree with you. I'm wearing headphones, and when he screamed, it actually reverberated in my headphones. So I hear you. I don't know if that was the best tactic. We will see. We'll continue on, though, because we also heard from Dr. Ye Eng. Now, this was the pediatric emergency doctor working at Jersey Shore University Medical Center when Corey's mother brought him in. And based on his evaluation, Dr. Eng testified that aside from the cuts and the bruising, Corey seemed to be in pretty good health.
Now, based upon your physical examination of Corey, the blood work, and the bone survey, did you medically clear Corey for release from the hospital?
Yes, I did.
And was Corey ever admitted as a patient from the emergency room?
No.
And while Corey was at the emergency room, did you speak on the telephone with a DCP&P worker without telling us the conversation?
No, we did.
And based upon this conversation, was Corey cleared to be released to his mother?
Yes.
And Corey was discharged a little after 1 a.m., correct?
Yes.
So he would have been discharged then on the early morning hours of April 2nd.
Yes.
Of 2021.
Yes.
And when you discharged Corey from the hospital, did you observe any symptoms of sepsis or infection or broken bones or any of these things?
No.
So, Ben, let's break this down. My understanding, this is April 1st going into April 2nd, which is the day Corey died. And the doctor is saying, essentially, and correct me if you heard something different, that there's no outward sign there's really anything wrong with Corey. I mean, first of all, you could say the sepsis. If the defense is saying, well, sepsis is what killed him, that seems shaky. But also, there's nothing else outwardly to suggest that, that there was something wrong with him. I mean, who do you think that hurt more, the prosecution and the defense? I think it hurt the defense more, right?
I think so too, and I think that the evidence came in quite well. I do think because it does suggest that something happened between the release and his death that caused his fatality.
Is it possible that he had I mean, look, we're not medical professionals, but I wonder if there was an underlying trauma, a blunt force trauma that couldn't have been detected that caused this. I don't know, because again, I'm wondering, okay, and now what do we make of this? Is there anything else? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's play a little bit more of this. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Did your office or hospital administer any fluids to him?
No, because he's very mild dehydrated. His vital signs are stable, so he doesn't need IV dehydration. We offer water, juice, snacks, everything, because very mild dehydration, and patient can take PO. At that time, we did not give any IV fluids.
Now, Corey's mother brought him into the hospital, correct?
Yes,
If you know, was he in the mother's care prior to entering the hospital?
I don't know exactly how she cared her son.
Now, you also stated that the bruises you saw were in different levels of healing.
Yes,
Some were a few hours old, approximately.
I cannot. A few hours mean maybe 1 hour to 40 hours, 80 hours. Few hours mean.
Did you happen to review medical records while you were examining Corey from ID Pediatrics?
No.
So again, my understanding, Corey's a little dehydrated, not to the point of maybe grave concern. There's a pretty big range of hours there that Corey could have received those bruises that the doctor saw. When, again, it seems like he's spending a lot of that time with his mother. What do you take away from that?
Yeah, it's this is kind of hard to suss out. I suppose this helps the defendant in some ways because it clouds the issue a little bit, but it comes back to whether it was blunt force trauma in the short-term incident just prior to his death, or whether it was longer-term, which led to sepsis. I mean, in either event, it would seem to point to Christopher.
Yeah, well, let's continue on that because Corey's mother had taken him to Jersey Shore University Medical Center. Been up late, so it would make sense that maybe the 6-year-old would be tired. But when Gregor realized Corey was still acting strangely later in the day, he took the boy to the ER at a different hospital, Southern Ocean County Medical Care. And William Doyle, he was a triage nurse working that night. He says he didn't realize the severity of Corey's situation right away, and also said that he seemed really unemotional about the whole thing.
Corey was over. Corey was in Chris's arms. His arms were over Chris's shoulders. His legs were dangling. His arms did not look like they had much movement to them. His legs did not look like they had much movement to him. His head was rested on Chris's shoulder. His face was difficult to visualize. So when I first approached them, I knew that something was concerning, but I couldn't see everything I needed to see. So I was depending on Chris to convey a sense of urgency or unwellness that I did not get from him at first. It was more of a clinical description of what was going on, and I did not immediately feel I had to rush them back. I definitely knew it was concerning, but I needed just a little more information. If I saw Corey's face right away, it would have been much easier, but Corey's face was on Chris's shoulder.
What was the defendant's demeanor while you were in room 6?
While we were in room 6 was similar to when I first interacted with him in the waiting room. It was I would say it was a clinical aspect in that he was describing what was going on without much more difference than anyone else would, regardless of their role with the person. So he was conveying the information, but there wasn't much more than that.
And after you drew blood from Corey, where did you go after that?
Well, Corey required a lot of attention, so we still had an emergency room to run. So I told the charge nurse, I'll take the charge phone, which handles the ambulances. You focus on this. So I handled the charge nurse and the triage phone. and I went to various things throughout the ER while everyone worked on Corey. He was like an all hands on deck type of situation.
Ben, what do you make of it?
I think it's very bad for the defense. As a father of two boys, when one of them gets hurt, certainly hurt badly enough or is sick enough to take to the emergency room, you are wild with panic and concern, much more than you would be if it were an injury or sickness to yourself. And the fact that he lacked affect, and this nurse seemed incredibly truthful and calm in his demeanor. I think he's a very credible witness, and I think it's very damaging testimony that a father would not be more concerned that his son or daughter would be requiring emergency care.
Now, you could say that could be shock. Of course, people react differently. I am curious, before we go, do you have a better sense from what we've been playing what the cause of death was? I mean, in maybe at the very minimum, does it seem that sepsis could have been the result here, that's what caused the death of Corey, or does that just seem unlikely based on what we were just playing?
Yeah, I don't want to speculate because I don't have any medical knowledge at all. Right. But we all know that sepsis can be deadly, and so it seems plausible. But I go back to the whole idea that whether it was some short-term injury or a longer-term injury, it all seems to point to the defendant. And the old tort theory of the eggshell skull rule. If you cause an injury and it ends up having worse consequences than anticipated, at least in a civil context, you're still liable for that.
Yep. Law School 101. Ben Chu, great seeing you. Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate your insight as we cover this case, and more testimonies expected as the week progresses. We're going to keep everybody updated here on Sidebar. But Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.